The first thing I want to make perfectly clear before we start making these fuel tanks, this was the invention and development of Wayne Shriven. Wayne had several years ago at Brodex allowed me to fly his twin engine Henkel with 2 carbon fiber tanks, and I was so impressed with the way the plane flew I wanted to pursue many of the ideas that Wayne had developed over the years. One of them, and he has done all the work. I am not the developer or the designer or anything. I have pretty much from Wayne's tooling made an exact copy of his tooling, and Wayne was not interested in making these for production, and I thought this would be a great way to add this to the world of products that's available to us as stunt flyers. When I got to fly Wayne's twin engine Henkel with the carbon tanks, the first thing I noticed was, wow, it felt lighter on the lines and lighter in the turn, and I knew part of it was that the plane was relatively light. I think it was even lighter than the single engine plane I was flying. But part of it was, and I've since come to realize this, that in my own case or in anybody's case really, every plane that we fly has a weight distribution behind the CG, forward of the CG, depending on where we select to have the CG. But the fuel tank in almost every case is ahead of the CG. Now we all know other options. You build a plane, you've spent, and this is my whole point, you've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours to build this plane. And now, oh gee, it's nose heavy. Well, we all know the first thing everybody does is add solder to the tail wheel, and that makes the plane very unstable. I've not had good luck ever adding weight to the back. It's always better to take the weight out of the front. Now, if you have a plane that's already, you know, in the right CG, or you don't need to adjust the CG, you really don't need a carbon tank, a magnesium spinner, a carbon back plate. You don't need any of those things. You're only dealing with here, the advantage to this would be a plane that's already built and that's nose heavy. So the first thing I would want to do, and I wanted to say this because a carbon fiber tank is a relatively expensive thing, and if you don't need it, you don't need it. The first decision you have to make is, do I need this? So I would replace every spinner part I could with either a lighter spinner. I make carbon fiber backplates. Randy has magnesium backplates. The magnesium head on the motor is another choice to get wet. But at some point in time, maybe it's still nose heavy. Now, getting between an ounce, I'm just going to put an ounce. But sometimes it comes out to significantly more than an ounce, depending on how heavy the original. If you have a tank that's heavy to begin with, but it's never less than an ounce lighter to make it out of carbon. What this has done in my case is several of the planes that I've already had in my entourage flying, Miss Ashley, the I-Beam Spitfire, Mike Kajeski's plane, and Strega, and the Typhoon, have all benefited from this. Every one of them has been better because not only is the CG a little further back now, giving that light feeling, a light turn. Kent Tyser has one in his Strega. But the point was he had never had the CG back where it was when we were at the team trials, and when he got the CG back from having the carbon fiber tank in the plane got a lot easier to fly, a lighter stick loading, a lot of trim benefits in his particular case. But again, it's not the first choice. It's easier and cheaper to replace the spinner. Easier and maybe not, I don't know about the magnesium parts for the PA. But even if you have these, and several people do, and they'd still like to have a trim tool, they'd like to have a tool and try it with that ounce and a half out of the nose. This allows you to do that. And there's no other way I know of. There's no other part that I know of that you can replace conveniently. And even in the worst of all worlds, if it didn't suit your needs, you could take it out and put it in another plane. But my feeling is it's always better to remove weight from the heavy side than add weight to the light side. A few years back, and I believe it was 95, I started getting interested in molding. And I decided at that point in time I was building a Spitfire, and I think this is an appropriate thing to decide right now too. I wanted to do some small parts. I did the little fake dummy exhausts. I made some spinners, actually made the Spitfire spinners, made some 5-bladed props, did some things like that. And then I went on to making some cowlings, These were all on that 95 Spitfire. But I never went any further than I made some spinner back plates at that time too. These were relatively simple, easy, entry-level parts to make. Nothing there was high-tech. Nothing there happened. And if something broke, something bad happened. So they were relatively good. If you're interested in molding, and if you're looking at this video, you probably are interested in molding. I then went on, and I had done this years earlier with Dave Midgley, went back and redid some of my tuned pipe tooling, developed the landing gear article. It's in Flying Models for the carbon. This was Howard Rush's part that I had pretty much copied, I guess is the right way to say it. Looked at the way he had made his and made a similar one. But these two parts, the fuselages on the Typhoon and Miss Ashley, I had to do that pretty much on my own. And the carbon wing I had to do on my own because nobody's done it except Kazi, and he won't sell you the parts. So the thing that's different about a fuel tank is you need relatively, all of these other parts, every part here, you can do with very, very inexpensive tooling. When you want to make a carbon fiber tank, you need to do it the way Wayne has developed. You need relatively expensive tooling. You're thinking or wondering, why does a carbon fiber tank cost as much as it does? The reason is, you have to amortize the tooling, which is very expensive in this case. You have to amortize that tooling over how many tanks you're going to make. In other words, if you only make one fuel tank, the whole cost of the tooling has to go into that one tank, similar to doing a prototype. If you make two, that cuts the cost of the tooling in half. It keeps chopping the cost of this down every time you make a tank. You've spread it over a bigger line of produced parts. The material is expensive when you buy small amounts. In fact, it's very expensive. Sometimes they won't even sell you the resin. The other it's a relatively toxic material. It's not something an average hobbyist would want to have in his house, and when you use it, you must take adequate safety precautions. But the big one, the thing that makes this different than all other parts that I make, is it is really labor intensive. The molds have to be prepped, they have to be cleaned after every use, and the parts are so thin and so delicate when they're being made that it's relatively labor intensive. So when you combine all three of these, you just can't make the parts very inexpensive. You could make them a little less expensive if this went into if this part becomes very, very popular, and you can tool up to make 50 at a time. That's going to cut the cost. It cuts this cost a little bit. It cuts this cost a little bit. But it never cuts this cost. This cost is a constant. You're never going to be able to make these in an automated fashion. Each one is handmade. Each joint has to be hand ground. Every one is a little bit of a labor of love. First part is the end cap part. These were machined by Jimmy Snyder from and a relatively accurate copy of the ones that Wayne was using. It's a male-female part that rides on pins. And I think you can figure out that when you want to make a carbon fiber part as light and strong as it possibly can be, and obviously we're really pushing a limit here. I mean, I think we're right up on a limit that even if you had access to more expensive equipment, you couldn't make that part a whole lot lighter. But to make an end cap, and here's an end cap that came out of the mold this morning, and you can see it's really squeezed and squashed every drop of extra resin. The idea is to get the carbon content high, the resin content low. I think we've done that. And he's got a set stop on here that when that squeezes, it's to a very, very specified thickness. These we've cut one apart and mic'd it all over to see it's very, very accurate. Anyway, what happens, and it's the first part of making a part. And I wanted to show this in the sequence